lonely rancher for years, until the Apache girl said, "Let me feel you tonight." The rancher had lived alone for so long that silence felt normal to him. He woke up every morning before the sun, not because he had to, but because his body no longer knew how to sleep in. The land decided his routine. The animals waited, the fences needed checking, and the day always demanded something from him. He spoke very little, and when he did, it was usually to his horses or cattle, not to people. His ranch sat far from town, surrounded by dry fields, open sky, and distant hills. The house was small and old, built with strong hands many years ago. Inside, everything had its place. Nothing was messy, but nothing felt warm either. The walls carried no pictures of family, no signs of laughter. There were only a few old items, tools, boots, a hat hanging by the door, that told the story of a man who lived simply and expected nothing more from life. Years earlier, the rancher had not imagined this kind of future. Once, he had dreams that felt alive. Once, he believed that life would give him more than work and quiet nights. But time had taken those dreams away, one by one. Loss had come quietly, not in one loud moment, but slowly, like water wearing down stone. People he cared about left his life, some by choice, some by fate. He never spoke about it. He never complained. He simply learned how to carry the weight. In town, people knew him as a good man, but a distant one. He helped when help was needed. He paid fairly, kept his word, and never caused trouble. But he never stayed long. He avoided long conversations and personal questions. When someone asked if he ever felt lonely, he gave a small smile and changed the subject. Most people stopped asking after a while. Loneliness to him was not loud. It did not scream or cry. It sat beside him during dinner when he ate alone at the wooden table. It followed him into the barn when the sun went down. It rested in the empty chair on his porch where no one ever sat. He did not fight it anymore. He accepted it like a part of the land, dry, quiet, and unchanging. At night, the ranch was especially silent. The wind moved through the grass and stars filled the sky. Some nights, he stood outside longer than needed, looking up, wondering how life could feel so wide and yet so empty at the same time. He often thought about how many years had passed without real connection. Not just company, but understanding. Someone who would see him not as the quiet rancher, but as a man who still felt deeply. He told himself he was fine. He told himself that this was enough. Work, land, routine. But deep inside, there was a part of him that had not gone quiet. It waited. It listened. It remembered what it felt like to be close to someone, even if those memories were now faded and soft around the edges. Some evenings, he sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the light disappear. He thought about conversations he never had, words he never spoke, chances he never took. Not because he was afraid, but because he believed those days were behind him. Life had taught him to expect less, and so he did. The rancher had learned to survive alone. That did not mean he wanted to. It only meant he did not know another way anymore. He had built walls around himself, not out of anger but out of habit. Walls made from long days, tired nights, and the belief that connection only led to pain. These walls were strong, but they were also heavy. Carrying them took effort, even if he never admitted it. What he did not know was that life still had plans for him. Not loud plans, not dramatic ones, but quiet moments that arrive when a person least expects them. The kind that do not force their way in, but wait patiently until the heart is ready to notice. For now, he was just a lonely rancher, living his days the same way he had for years. He did not expect change. He did not ask for it. He believed the road ahead would look just like the one behind him. But sometimes, even in the deepest silence, something new begins to move. And he had no idea that his long, quiet season was slowly coming to an end. The change did not arrive suddenly. It came slowly, the way most important things do. One ordinary morning, the rancher drove into town for supplies. He parked his old truck near the small store, nodded to a few familiar faces, and went about his business like always. He did not expect anything different from any other day. That was when he noticed her. She stood outside the community center, speaking with an older man. Her posture was calm, her voice steady. She was not loud, but people listened when she spoke. There was strength in the way she held herself, not sharp or demanding, but grounded. She seemed comfortable where she was, as if the land itself knew her. The rancher did not stare. He never stared. He simply noticed, the way a man notices something unusual on a familiar road. Something that does not belong there, yet somehow feels right. Later, inside the store, he saw her again. She was buying supplies just like him. When she reached for something on a high shelf and struggled, he stepped forward without thinking and handed it to her. Their eyes met for a brief moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but clear. He nodded. "You're welcome." That should have been the end of it. A simple exchange, a forgettable moment, but it was. There was something in her eyes that stayed with him long after he left the store. Not curiosity, not pity, just awareness. As if she saw him standing there, not just his hat and worn jacket, but the man inside them. A few days later, he heard her name for the first time. Someone mentioned that an Apache woman had come to help with community work nearby. She was staying for a while, helping elders, assisting with land matters, and working with ranchers when needed. He listened quietly, pretending not to care, but his mind remembered her face. When she came to his ranch, it was for work. A fence along the edge of his land bordered an area used by her people. It needed repair, and cooperation was required. He expected officials or paperwork. Instead, she arrived in a simple truck, stepped out, and walked toward him with confidence. "I'm here about the fence," she said. "I heard you're the one who handles things fairly." He looked at her, surprised but not uncomfortable. "I try to." They walked the land together, discussing the repair. She spoke clearly, directly, without hesitation. She did not talk down to him or act impressed by him. She treated him like an equal. That alone was different from what he was used to. They worked side by side that day. Not closely, but within the same space. She did not rush. She respected the land, touching the fence posts carefully, listening when he explained things. He noticed how she paused to observe the wind, the ground, the direction of the sun. She moved with awareness, as if every step mattered. At one point, they rested near the barn. He offered her water. She accepted. "You don't talk much," she said, not as a complaint, but as an observation. "I talk when there's something to say," he replied. She smiled slightly. "That's fair." There was no awkwardness, no pressure, just quiet understanding. Over the next few weeks, she returned a few times. Sometimes for work, sometimes for discussion, sometimes simply because she was nearby. Each time they spoke a little more. Not about deep things at first, about land, weather, animals, safe topics, but slowly the tone changed. She asked him questions others never did, not personal in a careless way, but thoughtful. How long he had lived on the ranch, what he enjoyed about the work. Whether he ever felt tired of the quiet. When he answered, she listened, truly listened. She did not interrupt. She did not rush to respond. That alone made him speak more than he usually did. One afternoon, as they sat outside watching the sky darken with clouds, she said, "You carry a lot alone." He did not respond right away. He looked at the ground, then at the horizon. "I manage," he said finally. "I know," she replied. "But managing is not the same as living." Her words stayed with him long after she left that day. He began to notice changes in himself, small ones. He looked forward to her visits, even if he did not admit it. He found himself thinking about conversations they had, about things she said. The ranch did not feel as heavy when she was there. The silence was different, not empty, shared. She did not try to fix him. She did not push him to open up. She simply existed beside him, steady and present. One evening, as the sun set in deep colors across the sky, she stayed longer than usual. They sat on the porch, the air cool and calm. Neither felt the need to speak right away. "You know," she said eventually, "where I come from, we believe that silence is not empty. It's full of things people don't say." He nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "You don't have to stay silent forever." Something shifted inside him at that moment, not a dramatic change. Just a crack in a wall that had been standing for years. He did not answer her directly, but for the first time in a long while, he did not feel the need to hide behind quiet. As she stood to leave, she paused. "I'll see you again," she said, not asking, not assuming. Just stating it as truth. He watched her drive away, the dust rising behind her truck. The ranch felt different after that. Not louder, not brighter, just less empty. That night, as he lay in bed, he realized something that unsettled him and warmed him at the same time. For the first time in years, he did not feel completely alone. And somewhere deep inside, a part of him that had been silent for too long began to wake up. The evening came quietly, as evenings often did on the ranch. The sun had dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and earth. The rancher had finished his daily work, repairing fences, feeding the animals, and checking on the water troughs. Everything was in order as it always was. Yet tonight felt different, though he couldn't put his finger on why. There was a restlessness he hadn't felt in years, something stirring quietly in the stillness of his ranch. It was just before dusk when she appeared at the edge of the property, walking along the path that led to the barn. He had expected her to come for work, as she usually did, but tonight there was something in the way she moved, light, purposeful, calm. She carried nothing but a small bag slung over her shoulder, and the setting sun caught the strands of her hair, making them glow like fire against the fading light. "You're still working?" she asked as she approached. Her voice was warm and steady, but there was a softness underneath, a care that made him pause. "I like to keep things in order," he replied, straightening up from the last fence post he had been checking. She nodded, her gaze scanning the land around them. "It's beautiful here." "Quiet, open, makes you think differently." He said nothing, only watching her as she stepped closer, her boots stirring up small clouds of dust. There was a confidence in her that he hadn't seen in anyone else in a long time. She wasn't trying to impress him or test him. She simply existed in the same space, fully herself. And in that presence he felt something unfamiliar, curiosity, anticipation, maybe even a flicker of hope. They walked together toward the barn, side by side but not too close. She paused occasionally, touching a fence post or examining the corner of a wall. "You take care of everything yourself?" she asked lightly, almost casually. "I do what I must," he said. "That's a lot," she replied. "I mean doing it all alone." He shrugged, not used to talking about himself, especially not to anyone. "It's how I've always done it." "You don't have to do it alone," she said softly, almost as if testing the weight of her words. He didn't respond immediately. There was a long silence, broken only by the distant sound of a horse nickering and the rustle of wind through the grass. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out and lightly touched his shoulder. Not a bold gesture, not demanding, just a simple human touch. "You've carried a lot," she said. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself." His heart thudded, though he tried to hide it. He had grown used to his solitude, to the quiet that wrapped around him like a familiar cloak. But this moment was different. It felt like a crack in the walls he had built around himself, a gentle opening that invited something he hadn't allowed in years: connection. They stayed in the barn for a while, sitting on an old wooden bench. The sun had disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues. Fireflies began to appear, blinking their soft lights in the growing darkness. She talked not about work, not about the land, but about simple things, memories of her childhood, stories of her family, small traditions that she cherished. He listened at first quietly, then more openly, answering her questions with short, honest responses. There was a natural rhythm to their conversation, a balance he hadn't experienced in years. No judgment, no pressure, just the gentle exchange of words between two people who were learning to understand one another. He noticed how her eyes lit up when she spoke about things she loved, how her hands moved slightly, as if illustrating invisible stories. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen, not for the rancher he presented to the world, but for the person he had always been beneath the work and silence. As the night deepened, the wind carried a chill, and she wrapped her coat tighter around her. He offered his jacket and she smiled, accepting it without hesitation. "Thank you," she said, and the sincerity in her tone made him realize that this moment, this simple, quiet evening, was already leaving its mark on him. They sat together in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Crickets chirped, a distant owl hooted, and the horses settled into the barn with soft, rhythmic noises. In that quiet, words became unnecessary. The rancher felt a calm he hadn't known in years, as if the weight he had carried alone for so long was finally easing, even if just slightly. Then she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper, yet clear in the still air. "It's okay to let someone in," she said. Her hand brushed his lightly, not in a rush, not as a demand, but as a gesture of trust, of invitation. "You don't have to stay closed forever." He looked at her, his mind racing with thoughts he didn't fully understand. Part of him wanted to pull back, to retreat into the safety of his old walls. But another part, a part he had almost forgotten, wanted to step forward, to feel the connection he had denied himself for so long. The night stretched on and their conversation became deeper, more personal. He shared small pieces of his past, stories of the land, memories of family, moments of regret and quiet victories. She listened, her attention unwavering, never judging, never pushing. And in return, she shared her own experiences, not as a means to compare, but as a way to build understanding. As darkness settled fully over the rancher realized that he had laughed for the first time in years, not the polite, short-lived laugh, but a true, unguarded laugh that came from the heart. He had spoken freely, not as the stoic man everyone assumed he was, but as someone rediscovering his ability to connect. Eventually, the conversation turned toward the stars. They stepped outside, standing side by side on the porch. The sky was vast and clear, a blanket of stars stretching across the horizon. He noticed the way she pointed out constellations, telling stories about their meanings, and he realized that he was listening more intently than he had ever listened to anyone before. "You've never done this alone, have you?" she asked, her voice gentle, teasing. "I suppose not," he admitted, a small smile touching his lips. "Then maybe it's time to try," she said softly, almost as a suggestion, almost as a promise. In that moment, something shifted completely. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was significant. He felt a warmth, a comfort, a sense of possibility that he had not allowed himself to feel in years. It was not about the physical closeness, not about a sudden spark of romance. It was about trust, about understanding, about two people recognizing each other in a way they had not been recognized before. Before leaving that night, she looked at him and said something that would stay with him forever. "Let me feel you tonight," she whispered, not in a rush, not as a command, but as an expression of her desire to know him, to understand him, to share a part of herself with him. It was a statement of trust, of openness, and for the rancher, it was an invitation to step out of the silence that had held him captive for so long. He nodded, not knowing exactly what to say, but understanding completely. That night he went to bed with a heart that felt lighter, a mind that felt clearer, and a quiet anticipation he hadn't felt in decades. The ranch, which had always felt vast and empty, suddenly seemed smaller, warmer, as if it had been waiting for this connection all along. And so, in the quiet of the night, two people began a journey, not one of grand gestures or dramatic moments, but of trust, presence, and the slow, steady rediscovery of what it means to be seen and understood. The rancher had lived many years alone, but tonight marked the first night he realized that life still had the power to surprise him, to awaken something inside that he had thought long gone. The night ended without urgency, without haste, but with the unspoken promise that things would not be the same again. Something gentle, something real had begun, and in the heart of the lonely rancher, a quiet hope took root. The morning after that night felt different, though the rancher didn't fully understand why at first. The sun rose slowly over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields. The usual sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing, horses stamping, the distant wind through the grass, were still there, but something in the air had shifted. It was quieter, yet somehow fuller, as if the land itself had noticed the change inside him. He went about his usual chores, feeding the animals and checking fences, but his mind kept drifting back to the previous evening. Her words, her presence, the way she had looked at him, they lingered like a soft echo that refused to fade. Normally, he would have pushed such thoughts aside, calling them distractions, but now they stayed, persistent and gentle, demanding attention. When she arrived later that morning, carrying a basket of supplies she had brought from town, he felt an unexpected flutter of anticipation. He tried to hide it, telling himself it was foolish, but he could not deny it. She smiled at him as she approached, her eyes bright and calm, and the rancher realized he had been waiting for this moment without even knowing it. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm and easy. "Morning," he replied, a little more stiffly than usual. He cleared his throat and added, "Didn't expect you so early. I like to start the day when it's quiet," she said. "Besides, there's work to do." They began their tasks together, repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm. At first, the work felt ordinary, routine, but as the hours passed, a comfortable rhythm developed between them. She moved with ease, listening when he gave instructions but also offering her own observations. He noticed how naturally she adapted to the work, how she treated the land with respect, and how her calm presence seemed to make everything around him feel lighter. During a brief pause, she sat down on a fallen log, wiping sweat from her brow. "You know," she said, "you've built something special here, not just the ranch but this place. It feels alive, like it belongs to you." He looked at her, caught off guard. Compliments were not something he received often. "I've just tried to keep it running," he replied, shrugging. "It's more than that," she said softly. "It's a part of you. I can see it." Her words stirred something inside him. He wanted to say more, to open up, but the habit of silence was strong. He simply nodded, unsure if he could find the right words. She smiled gently, as if she understood without needing him to explain. As the day went on, the sun climbed high and the work grew heavier. At one point, a gust of wind knocked over a tool and they both bent to pick it up. Their hands brushed for a brief moment. The touch was fleeting, yet it carried a strange weight. It was not about desire. It was about presence, acknowledgement, and a connection that neither had expected so suddenly. After finishing the repair, they sat on the porch steps, catching their breath. She handed him a bottle of water, and for a long moment, they simply watched the horizon. Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer heavy or lonely. It was a shared silence, comfortable and honest, like two people agreeing that words were not always necessary. "You don't have to retreat into yourself all the time," she said quietly, breaking the stillness. He shifted, looking down at his hands. "I've done it for so long, I don't know another way." "Maybe it's time to try," she suggested. "Not for me, not for anyone else, just for yourself." He stayed silent, letting her words settle. It was not easy to imagine a life beyond the walls he had built around himself. Fear, habit, and doubt all tugged at him, reminding him that vulnerability could be dangerous. But there was also a strange pull, a curiosity he could not ignore. Could he really allow himself to feel connection again? Could he risk opening his heart after all these years? She seemed to sense his hesitation. "You don't have to make a decision now," she said. "Just think about it, notice it, feel it, even a little is a start." As the afternoon sun began to fade, she stood and stretched, brushing dust from her clothes. "I should get going," she said, "but I'll be back tomorrow." He nodded, and for the first time, he felt a small, cautious excitement about seeing her again. Not just curiosity, but anticipation, a desire to experience her presence without retreating into himself. That night after she left, the rancher found himself walking to the edge of the pasture, looking at the stars. The sky was wide, the air cool, and the wind carried a quiet stillness. He thought about her words, about her presence, and about how different he felt after spending time with her. He realized that he had spent so many years believing that solitude was enough, when in truth, he had only been surviving, not living. Memories he had buried of laughter, of friendship, of trust, surfaced slowly. He remembered moments when he had opened up to people, only to be disappointed, and how those experiences had built the walls he now carried. But sitting under the stars, he felt something shift. The walls seemed less impenetrable. The weight of loneliness felt lighter. In the following days, he began to notice small changes in himself. He smiled more easily, laughed quietly at things he had long ignored, and found himself looking forward to her visits. He was more present, more aware, more willing to engage with life beyond the work and routine that had consumed him for so long. Yet, he also struggled. There were moments of doubt and fear. He worried about crossing boundaries, about cultural differences, about the possibility of being hurt if he let himself care too deeply. Sometimes, the old habits of retreat would tug at him, urging him to close himself off once more. But every time, he remembered her words, her presence, and the quiet trust she had offered him. One evening, after a long day on the ranch, she stayed later than usual. They sat together on the porch, the sky painted with the soft light of dusk. She turned to him and said, "I know it's not easy to open up, but you've already started even if you don't see it." He looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, and felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice low. "You can," she said softly, "step by step. That's all it takes. You don't have to do it perfectly, and you don't have to do it alone." Her words were gentle, but they carried weight. He realized that she wasn't asking for anything dramatic. She wasn't rushing him or demanding him to change instantly. She was simply offering him a choice, to allow connection, to allow trust, to allow himself to feel again. And for the first time in many years, he considered the possibility, not as a fleeting thought, but as a real, tangible option. He could step out of his isolation, not for anyone else, but for himself. The night ended quietly. She left with the same calm assurance she always carried, leaving him alone on the porch. But the silence felt different now. It was no longer a reminder of what he lacked. Instead, it was filled with potential, with possibility, with the quiet hope that life could still offer something meaningful. That night, as he lay in bed, he reflected on the past, the present, and the uncertainty of the future. He realized that opening himself to connection did not erase the years of solitude, nor did it promise a life without challenges. But it offered something more valuable than he had allowed himself to imagine, a chance to live fully, to feel deeply, and to trust again. And somewhere deep inside, a small flame began to burn, a flame of hope, of courage, and of the possibility that life, even after years of quiet and isolation, could still bring unexpected joy and companionship. The rancher knew the road ahead would not be simple. There would be doubts, fears, and moments when the past threatened to pull him back into solitude. But now, with her presence lingering in his thoughts, he felt ready to face the uncertainty, ready to explore the connection that had quietly begun, and ready, perhaps, to let himself feel again. The days after that evening carried a new energy, though nothing about the ranch had changed. The sun still rose over the hills, the horses still neighed in the morning, and the wind still whispered through the grass. But the rancher noticed subtle differences in himself. He woke with a lighter step, a quiet sense of anticipation that he had not felt in years. He no longer moved through the day simply to survive. He moved through it noticing small joys, small signs of life around him, and small possibilities within himself. She continued to visit, sometimes for work, sometimes simply to be present. Each time, she brought with her a calm confidence, a grounded energy that made even ordinary moments feel significant. They would work together on the land, repairing fences, tending to the animals, or planning small improvements. Sometimes they would sit on the porch, sharing water or snacks, speaking quietly about simple things, the sky, the wind, or the stars. Each moment, ordinary as it seemed, carried the weight of something more: trust, understanding, and the slow building of connection. The rancher found himself speaking more freely. Not about grand things, not about what everyone else might want to hear, but about small truths, things he had kept buried for years. He told her about the long days, the quiet nights, the isolation that had shaped him. He told her about memories of loss, about moments he had believed he could never share with anyone. And she listened, not judging, not rushing him, only acknowledging each word, each pause, each truth he offered. She, in turn, shared pieces of her life. Stories of her family, traditions she cherished, memories of growing up close to the land. She spoke about the joys and challenges she had faced, not as a comparison, but as a way to build understanding. The rancher began to realize that connection was not about grand gestures or sudden change. It was about sharing, listening, and being present. One evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, they sat together on the porch steps. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and earth. He had spent years believing that he was meant to be alone, that his life would always be filled with routine and silence. But now, sitting beside her, he felt a warmth he had almost forgotten, the warmth of being seen, truly seen and understood. "I never thought I could feel this way again," he admitted quietly, his voice almost lost in the soft sounds of the night. "You've always had it in you," she said gently. "You just needed someone to notice and someone willing to share it with you." Her words struck him, not as a revelation, but as a quiet truth he had been avoiding. He realized that loneliness had not been his destiny. It had been a season, a long and difficult one, but it was not permanent. Connection, trust, and companionship were possible, even for someone who had lived as quietly and alone as he had. The following weeks were filled with small but meaningful moments. They shared meals, tending to simple tasks together. Sometimes they walked through the pastures, discussing the land, the animals, and the slow changes of the seasons. Other times, they sat in comfortable silence, feeling the rhythm of life around them and the quiet presence of each other. Each day, the rancher felt a little braver, a little more willing to step out of his solitude and into the life that was waiting for him. He began to notice changes in himself beyond the ranch. He smiled more freely, laughed more easily, and even spoke to neighbors with a warmth he had not shown before. He realized that connection was not limited to one person or one place. It spread, influencing the way he approached life in every aspect. One night after a long day of work, they sat outside under the stars. The sky was clear, filled with countless points of light stretching across the horizon. He thought about the past, the years of isolation, and the quiet, persistent hope that had been sleeping inside him all along. She turned to him and said, "You're not the man you were when we first met. You're more alive now." He looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. "I didn't know I could change," he admitted. "You've been changing all along," she said. "You just didn't realize it." It was then that he understood fully that life's most important moments are not always dramatic or loud. Sometimes they arrive quietly in shared silences, in simple gestures, in words spoken softly and honestly. The trust they had built together, the care they had shown each other, and the patience they had practiced were the foundations of something real and lasting. The rancher began to envision a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. He saw a life where he could share not only his land and work, but also his thoughts, feelings, and dreams. He saw days filled not just with routine, but with laughter, conversation, and companionship. He understood that connection did not erase the past, nor did it promise perfection, but it offered something far more valuable: presence, understanding, and the possibility of belonging. Over time, the ranch and the rancher became inseparable parts of one another, but now, with her presence, the ranch also became a space of shared life. They worked together, shared moments of quiet joy, and built a bond grounded in trust and respect. It was a slow, steady growth, the kind that does not demand or rush, but allows two people to unfold naturally in each other's presence. He realized that letting someone in was not a weakness, nor was it a risk to his independence. It was an act of courage, a choice to embrace life fully, despite the fear of loss or disappointment. And in making that choice, he found not just companionship, but a sense of peace and fulfillment he had not known existed. The seasons changed, and the ranch continued to thrive. Crops grew, animals were cared for, and the land remained alive with the rhythm of life. But what had changed most profoundly was not the ranch itself, it was the rancher. He had learned to trust, to share, and to allow himself to feel deeply again. And in doing so, he discovered that life's greatest gift was not the work he completed or the land he tended, but the connections he allowed to grow in the quiet spaces of his heart. In the end, the rancher no longer saw himself as a man defined by years of loneliness. He saw himself as a man who had endured, who had survived, and who had learned that love and companionship were not out of reach, even after decades of solitude. The Apache woman had not just brought connection. She had helped him rediscover life itself, reminding him that even the quietest hearts could still feel, hope, and belong. And so, the rancher's story ended not with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but with a gentle, lasting truth. That life is richer when shared, that trust is a bridge to deeper understanding, and that even the longest seasons of solitude can give way to moments of warmth, presence, and quiet, enduring love. For the first time in many years, he felt complete, not because his life was perfect, but because it was no longer empty. The ranch was no longer just land. It was home, a place of work, of life, and most importantly, of shared connection. And in that connection, the rancher discovered that the heart he had guarded for so long was not only capable of feeling again, but was ready to embrace the future with hope, courage, and joy.